with Duncan. It was really good, and I didn't realize that you were doing these things until Dan Bronkhurst sent me a message, and really good. Is this something that you started sort of personally, or is it linked to your sort of work interests, or is it just something that you got a passion about?
Well, it's a mixture of all of that, that I'm a master in international relations and diplomacy, and I like to talk, I like to educate people, and I realized many things are happening and a lot of people don't really understand what is going on. And there are plenty of various analysts which use some scholar terminology, blah blah, but they don't really understand. Many of them are good, but many of them are also totally out of subject because they have never been there. For instance, I'm never commenting situation about countries which I never visited. Okay, I can be informed, but the question is, am I well informed?
Well, it's interesting you say that because our common connection is obviously with Ukraine, and I have to say is that I really enjoyed my time in that patrol with when you were my patrol leader. And I say this quite generally. Out of the 4 years I did in Ukraine, is that my most enjoyable time was under your command. So I did enjoy it, and
Thank
I
you.
have very good memories of that. But it's very interesting you talk about people giving opinions on places that they haven't been to. And I'm very conscious that if we do talk about Ukraine, is that the Western media, which is generally speaking quite good, but a lot of the sort of what I call armchair generals who are talking about Ukrainian military capability haven't actually seen the ground, and the ground, as you know, is very important in any military
Yes.
approach. And you and I know the ground very well, the area that's fighting, but also they haven't seen the Ukrainian armed forces at close hand. I'm not saying the Ukrainian armed forces are bad, but they certainly were not a sort of an efficient, effective fighting unit to take on a country like Russia.
Well, some units are better, some units are less
Absolutely.
trained. You know how it works with the military. It's impossible to reach the same level of training for each and every unit. But okay, so let me first introduce you, and then we will formally start with the questions, and then you can say your opinions about various issues that I prepared. So feel free to start a conversation about something that I didn't mention or didn't ask, because this is podcast. You have full freedom of speech. Hopefully, our platform on YouTube would be generous to us. So I will do a formal introduction. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another exciting episode of the podcast Peacemaker by Adnan Habul. Today we are honored to have an extraordinary guest who has dedicated his life to promoting peace, stability in some of the world's most challenging regions. Our guest, James Saya, is the true example of courage, diplomacy, and dedication. Hailing from beautiful landscapes of Scotland, James' remarkable journey has taken him from the battlefields of Afghanistan, dangerous Sahel, the complexities of Middle East, and the challenging terrain of Northern Ireland during his distinguished military career. James, welcome, and please say something more about yourself for our audience.
Well, thank you very much, Adnan. It's a great privilege to be on your podcast. The only thing I'd like to add to my military career, which ended some years ago, is that since then I've been working and increasingly working on confidence building security measures, working with the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office, and clearly with the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission in Ukraine, where all those sort of military skills have sort of fed into those scenarios. But I should add that it's not only just the military skills and experience. You sometimes realize that the military is not often the best solution if you're looking for peace and stability in those countries. And I sometimes think that if you have a military background, people will often stereotype you as all talking about fighting and equipment and all that goes. But actually, I like to focus much more on where peace and stability can come through the correct application of military force and, most importantly, the law of armed conflict. And with the conflicts that we see going on at the moment, whether it be Gaza and Israel or Ukraine, all those things still apply today.
It's interesting that you mentioned, I fully agree with your statement about stereotypes. I'm also a war veteran, as you well know, from Bosnian War. And people usually think that war veterans, military stuff, they are bloodthirsty people who are just narrow-minded. But for instance, when you mentioned Gaza, when I saw first images and recordings from Hamas terrorist attack on civilians, although I'm a war veteran who has seen and experienced the worst of the worst things, I almost vomited, because I felt sick. Also, I feel sick when I see ruthless shelling of civilians in Gaza as a retaliation. So when somebody asks me which side do you support, I can say that I cannot support any side. I can support only innocent civilians on both sides, and especially children, because they are not how can I say, they are not guilty for what elderly are doing, so they should not suffer on both sides. So this is my side, actually, peace as soon as possible. So what do you think?
Well, I'm not completely with you on that, because I believe that Gaza and Hamas was allowed to use civilian institutions in order to carry out their attacks. So I think it's very difficult to completely separate Hamas from the civilian population in Gaza, in some cases, not in all cases. But the point that you make, I think, is very right about the military response. I do believe that Israel has the right to respond militarily and defend itself, especially against an organization that is basically threatening or denying the existence of Israel. That is very clear in my mind. But what I really worry about, and I can use an analogy in places like Northern Ireland and even Iraq, is that where Israel doesn't use what I call proportionate response, is that it's in very danger of losing sort of what sympathy or understanding that it has in the world. And bearing in mind that Israel was just beginning to make diplomatic relations with some Arab countries, namely the UAE, Egypt, and that has now gone out the window effectively. So the more it continues to strike legitimately against Hamas, it's got to step a very careful line, because it could end up doing more damage than good in the long run. And we all know that, the hostage taking by Hamas, and that was absolutely callous, absolutely unforgivable, was a real sort of terrorist act. And it was perfectly right for Israel to respond in that manner. But we're now 5 or 6 weeks on from that period, or certainly 5 weeks. Is that what does Israel really want to achieve now? It's flattened most of northern Gaza, and I think the people that were there, the majority did leave to southern Gaza. But I also have to ask the question: what is Egypt doing about this? Because Egypt should have opened that crossing point a lot earlier, and arguably that why wasn't Egypt doing more to help the humanitarian situation? Now, if you ask an Egyptian, they would say, well, actually, when they had their revolution, or that all the arms and weapons that supported that revolution came in from Gaza. So they're very reluctant to open their borders, even though their people are essentially their people. I mean, Gaza used to belong to Egypt, as I'm sure you're well aware, and they are predominantly a Muslim population. You would have thought that if any country was going to help the people of Gaza, it would have been Egypt. So I'm slightly surprised at their hesitation in not opening their border crossing points to allow refugees to be moved into Egypt. I don't know whether you would share that.
Well, I think some people forget actually one very important fact. Hamas is actually child of Muslim Brotherhood movement, which current president of Egypt, Mr. Sisi, was actually fighting against. So probably that's why Egyptian authorities are reluctant to receive refugees, because they are probably afraid that a lot of Hamas fighters would infiltrate, because it's you are expert in security. My master thesis was about international terrorism, so we know that actually it's very difficult to fight terrorism. But one thing that I know is actually you cannot fight effectively against terrorism by another terrorism. You should actually make situation less friendly for recruitment of future terrorists. So this is one of the key points actually for peace making. So since you have also UN experience, you are aware that 18 heads of UN agencies, they call for ceasefire immediately. Also, Secretary General Mr. Guterres, he calls for humanitarian ceasefire. I fully agree with that because, I understand that Israel wants to get rid of Hamas like yesterday, not only today, but yesterday. But also too many children, too many so-called collateral damages are happening. I don't think all 18 UN agencies are anti-Semitic. You know what I mean?
Well,
I think they are just adhering to international humanitarian law, which should be in place.
Yes, and I do agree with you on that. But also under international humanitarian law is that the use of civilian infrastructure by the military is also
Yes.
not bad. And you made a very good point, is that when you're dealing with terrorists, it's actually sometimes very difficult to differentiate between them and the civilian population without the risk of collateral damage. And going back to my point is that I just feel that whilst Israel has the legitimate right to self-defense, it has to be very careful where it progresses from here, for all the reasons that you mentioned. And if I relate to Northern Ireland, you may not be aware, but 50 years ago, there was a very bloody Sunday where 13 civilians were killed by the British Army. And that probably extended the conflict for another 20 years. And also that is still an ongoing issue in terms of the peace and rehabilitation process that's going on in Northern Ireland. And out of all the good things, and there are many good things that the UK, the armed forces did in Northern Ireland, they will always only focus on the negative, yeah? And that one incident 50 years ago is still very much alive in people's memories. And I feel with Israel, if they really continue the level of retaliation, is that they'll only be remembered for all the collateral damage, the civilian deaths, rather than their military objectives. So that's what I really worry about, because what does that mean? It actually prolongs the conflict.
Yeah.
It doesn't help to bring that conflict to an end, whether it's a two-state solution or whatever. And if you consider, and I do use Northern Ireland again as an analogy, it took nearly 30 years before we've reached the situation which we have now, which is relative peace. And there's still instances that are going on, but essentially the population is at ease living with each other. Yeah, that is not the case in Israel or any of the surrounding territories. But that's the solution. That's the position you need to get to, where the civilian population on both sides want to be together and are talking to each other. And too much military action actually destroys that.
Yeah, unfortunately, there are many factions which are strongly against that two-state solution. But in my opinion, I believe that if there would be two states like Israel and Palestine, I think they would very soon, knowing the similar mentality and culture, both actually, both groups, both nations are Semitic. That's why it's ridiculous to speak about Arabic anti-Semitism, because they are the largest Semitic group. Not only Jews are Semitic group, but also Arabs are Semitic group. So how can you blame them for anti-Semitism? But I believe if there would be two-state solution, they would very soon start cooperating, and they would be very good and friendly neighbors. And that would eradicate actually existence of various groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, whatever. You know what I mean?
So, I do, and actually, the great sadness about these attacks on the 7th of October is that Israel was actually moving towards having a relationship with some of the Arab powers. Now, that may be a reason why Hamas chose the time to launch that attack, because they realized that it would sideline that sort of reaching out to those neighbors. So I suspect that might have been one of the many reasons behind when they did it.
Yeah, one of the reasons, according to some sources, is actually it's very strange that Hamas terrorist attack took place in the peak of anti-Netanyahu protests. And Hamas didn't help Palestinian cause at all. On contrary, they made things even worse, and they knew it's going to be worse. But on the other hand, if you are following certain logic, they helped Netanyahu. Now he is, finding his way out of that judiciary issue and corruption, accusations, also strange blindness of Mossad, which is very, very capable. We both know that Mossad is probably one of the best intelligence services in the world, and it's hard to believe that. Look, I'm thinking like, okay, you have 6,000 cans of beer. You need a truck to load 6,000, cans of beer. Can you imagine 6,000 huge rockets? What do you need? You need much bigger infrastructure to smuggle it, and it's impossible to believe that Mossad couldn't see it. For me, it's something that I cannot understand.
That's a really interesting point. I mean, the only thing I would say is that intelligence failures always happen.
Yes, they do, but this is kind of too ridiculous.
Yeah,
it's too big.
I think it probably, and I don't know, but it probably shows how clever Hamas has been in using the tunnel systems in Gaza to conceal that from certainly from imagery, but it does reveal a failing in human intelligence. You would have thought, as you say, that if the Gaza civilians are really that entwined with Hamas, you would have thought there would have been a pretty good intelligence flow to Mossad. So I would agree with you totally. I'm surprised that they didn't see that coming, and they were definitely caught out as a result.
Yeah, but let's hope peace will, at least humanitarian ceasefire will start as soon as possible, and killing of innocent civilians on both sides would stop. But let's talk about area that we are more familiar with. So let's talk about Ukraine. Are you updated about current situation in Ukraine? Crossing of Dnieper River, opening new front.
I am, and I should add that for the last sort of 18 months since the latest crisis has developed, is that I've been talking and giving public talks on the situation in Ukraine, not only to raise money, but also to raise awareness of the situation. Because, like you, I'm sure it was an important part of my life, and I'm very sort of distressed by what we've seen over the last 18 months, and in my view, that Russia's actions are totally inexcusable. But there were some provocations that, with proper diplomacy, that possibly could have been avoided before February 2022. So, I do worry where the war is going from here, partly because, whilst I mentioned earlier, is that I think the Western media coverage has been really good. Generally speaking, it's been very, very good. For all the reasons that have been mentioned by your other speakers, is that Ukraine has now slipped away from the sort of mainstream at the moment. But I think more importantly, at a military level, is that they've been talking about this counteroffensive for 6 months, yeah. And if you look at the maps, is that the areas that they have made some ground is very small in the last 6 months, really small. You're talking 3 or 4 kilometers. Okay, they had some success this time last year up in the Kharkiv area, and also obviously in Kherson. But that was before they started talking about a counteroffensive. And actually, over the last 6 months, I think it's very noticeable that the Ukrainians do not have the military capability to inflict a decisive military defeat on Russian forces in Ukraine. And that is contrary to what I know a lot of my friends and colleagues think. And some of them think that it's only a matter of time before they can retake Crimea and retake Donbass. I personally think that is fanciful thinking. I'm very happy to be challenged on those points. And the only reason why I say that is that I don't believe they have the numerical advantage or the operational advantage to take ground, but more importantly, hold it and then resist any counterstroke by Russian forces. So, with one exception, they can only achieve that if there is a massive uptake in Western military support, including boots on the ground. But that is not going to happen in the current electoral environment. So all I see is a stalemate at best and an escalation at worst. And I know this is very controversial because some people say I'm an appeaser. I'm not an appeaser at all. I love Ukraine. I love Ukrainian people. What Russia is doing is absolutely wrong. But I think the future of Ukraine, if it wants to become part of the European Union, if it wants to align with what I call Western values, which they do, you and I know that they want that, is that they might have to accept some form of ceasefire along the positions that the Russian forces are currently occupying. That is not to give a signal that they're going to cede territory to Russia formally, because I use the example of North and South Korea. That war effectively has never ended. It's still an ongoing war. Yeah. There was a ceasefire, which I think occurred in 1953. Yeah. But what that ceasefire gave, it gave the opportunity for South Korea to really expand economically, democratically, with underlying support from the USA, effectively guaranteed their integrity. North Korea became a sideline. It's been a disaster if you've been in North Korea. No one wants to live in North Korea. It's an economic basket case. It can't even feed its own people. If you apply that situation to, let us say, the Donbass and Crimea, where you have an ongoing conflict, but you have a ceasefire, that allows both sides to walk away with something at this stage. Most importantly, it has a ceasefire, so stops further civilian casualties. Secondly, it allows Putin to say that he has defended his Russian people, even though that we know that's not the case, but it allows him to say that. But also it allows Zelensky a way out, because he can say, I have not conceded territory at all. This is just a ceasefire. We will get that territory back further down the line, as what happened in East Germany, as what happened in Lithuania, Latvia. Those countries eventually, and actually very quickly, once the Soviet Union fell in 1991, within 10 years, they were in Europe. And actually, that is a solution that I see. I know it's quite controversial, but it allows Western money to allow Ukraine to grow economically, backed up by Western military support for their integrity. What do you think of that? Do you think do you think that is appeasement?
Well, it makes sense. But let's talk about that after 5 minutes break. Okay. We will make 5 minutes break and then we will come back and discuss further about this issue and various other topics. Okay, so welcome back after a 5 minutes break. I actually took opportunity to call Mr. Zelensky to ask him about his opinion about your long-term ceasefire. He disagrees. Well, you know that I don't know if you are familiar that actually I saved the life of President Zelensky at Stanitsa Luganska. But okay, it's a long story. I will make a separate uh, episode about this event. But of course, I didn't call Zelensky. He's very busy. But my opinion, you asked me about my opinion about this long-term ceasefire agreement. Yeah, I can agree that killing should stop. Like in Gaza, the same in Ukraine. Civilians should be spared of trauma. Uh, Countries need to rebuild, and people should live, especially when knowing that harsh winter is coming in Ukraine. It's going to be very, very difficult to survive for many civilians. But on the other hand, a lot of analysts say that if Ukraine would allow Russians certain time to recover, then they would build up even stronger forces, which would be more dangerous, and they would be direct threat to even NATO countries, such as Poland or maybe Romania or Baltic countries. We never know. So I'm always for diplomatic solutions. Sooner or later, every war ends up on the table with signatures of the sides. But the question is under which terms of conditions it's going to be signed. You know, that peace agreement. You know that my country is also living for almost 30 years within peace agreement, and it's okay. We make some progress, but at various issues we have still unresolved disputes which are pulling brakes on our way to EU membership. But speaking about EU membership, UK conducted Brexit. But since you are Scottish, I expected some kind of how to call it, Brexit from Brexit by Scottish. So what do you think about all that?
Well, it is actually a very sensitive subject, even today in Scotland. And one of the sadnesses of any referendum that has a sort of close result is that you end up living in a divided society. And the UK is divided as a result of Brexit, and that has all sorts of sort of social issues and political issues. And in Scotland, it was actually made worse because Scotland was the part of the United Kingdom that voted overwhelmingly to stay in the European Union. And that sort of added traction to the whole nationalist movement for understandable reasons. And that has been exploited by the nationalist movement because 10 years ago, or in 2014, when we had the referendum for Scottish independence, is that one of the cries from the unionist position was that if you want to stay in the European Union, your best bet is to vote to stay in the United Kingdom, because if you vote to leave the United Kingdom, you're going to be out of the United Kingdom and out of the European Union. So the nationalists have said that that was has been sort of proved to be a lie, because only 2 years later, the whole of the United Kingdom voted for Brexit. So I think it's exposed the divisions to a really large extent, which have now been exploited by those who seek to exploit those divisions. And any political party that has independence as part of its manifesto, it is a free gift for them to exploit. And so definitely whilst they talked about a referendum should be a once in a generation event, what was also written into the agreement is that if there was a significant change, and arguably leaving the European Union was a significant change for Scotland. And what has made the problem worse now is that the UK government is not allowing Scotland to have a referendum, another referendum on independence, which has made the problem even worse. So those are the issues that are rumbling on in the background. And we are living in a divided society as a result. Essentially, Scotland historically has always been a European country. But make no mistake, there will be some really big issues that Scotland would have to face if it joined the European Union. But it's become the whole issue has become a real sort of gift to the nationalist movement for some very understandable reasons. But it is a divisive issue without doubt.
Well, without any doubt, we can agree that we actually live in very turbulent part of history. So a lot of things are changing. Some people are saying that we are heading towards World War III, although I think, in my opinion, it would be World War IV, because number 3 was Cold War. But okay, we can agree or disagree, it doesn't matter. But also there are many shifts in powers. You know, there is a strengthening of BRICS, and more and more countries which are aligning or inclining towards BRICS against Western United States-led alliance. So what's your opinion about all that?
Well, if I understand it correctly, that BRICS is now from next year going to be BRICS +6, yeah, another 6 countries. Which, when you look at those countries, I think they include sort of Ethiopia, South Africa, Argentina, and I think the UAE, and Saudi Arabia as well.
Indonesia.
So it's a real mixture of countries, and it's actually quite surprising to me is that there is that mixture. But having said that, is that they've made quite clear is that one of their rationales for setting up BRICS is that it is to have an opposite agenda to the sort of US, Western European agenda, which is more about having a say in other people's sort of foreign policy. And those countries that are now joining BRICS have made it very clear that we want to have a sort of new order that's opposite to that American-led agenda. The other worry I have about BRICS is that there's no doubt that they've got some of the largest oil and gas producers in the world there. And if you throw in China and India with their sort of technological use of and access to technological raw materials, is that there is a real danger that the economic lifeline that we have lived for in the West is now being slowly moved to those BRICS countries. And even in purely geographical terms, if you take, let's say, a World War III or World War IV conflict, those BRIC countries are effectively or could control some major choke or trade routes. You've got the Suez Canal, you've got the Straits of Hormuz, you've got the sort of South China Sea. So the West are very reliant on those trade routes to maintain our economy. So I actually see BRICS as a potential sort of, I wouldn't say a threat, but it just needs to be, we need to engage with them. But currently, we are unable to engage with them properly because we say they don't hold the same values that we do when it becomes involved with foreign affairs for very understandable reasons. So I think it's a very interesting movement, and I'm not quite sure how the West is really going to react to that, because effectively the economic leverage that BRICS could have in the future could be significant. And I say could be because it's too early to say. You've got countries like Argentina in there, which, to be honest, is a bit of an economic basket case, to be frank. So I wouldn't put too much weight on it at this stage, but in the future, then that could really be an interesting question, where it could almost sort of undermine the US Western view of how we conduct our economies. That's
Yeah,
my view on it.
yeah. Actually, Pax-Americana is, let's say, uh, facing actually big time challenge, and this brings us to the future of the places where that communication between Western and other countries should take place, which is United Nations, OSCE. So, what do you think about the future of United Nations and OSCE as forums for diplomatic solutions?
Well,
Do you think United Nations should be reformed, or also?
yes, I do, but I think we have to sort of group those intergovernmental organizations much wider. I mean, in particular, something like the Africa Union, yeah. And what worries me about these institutions, and I speak very, very much from a sort of personal perspective, is that the status quo is always the preferred option. and and if you take something like the African Union, which was set up to basically give Africans much more say over their future of their continent, and much more involvement in in stability. When the Afghan Union has come out and has criticized a country like the coup in Niger, the undemocratic election that took place in Zimbabwe a couple of years ago, um, actually nothing happens.
Yeah.
So um, uh, uh, in my view, and again, these are very sort of personal views, is that the only advantage is that all these international organizations, it does provide a space to have a conversation. But
Yeah.
everything else is actually almost a waste of time, and most importantly, a waste of money. Um, and I go back to that statement when I say that the status quo is the preferred option. If you look at the number of UN missions around the world, and I've been very fortunate, I've served in many of them. In fact, I've served in the longest serving UN mission, which has been going on since 1974 in Cyprus, to the largest UN mission, which was the one in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Actually, their progress on the ground is very limited, but they do provide a forum to have a conversation. And most importantly, they provide an international spotlight on issues. And whilst you and I know the OSCE very well and the special monitoring mission in Ukraine, whilst they definitely had issues, the one good thing that they did was that it provided an international spotlight on the situation. And without having that international organization present, a lot more worse things would have gone on, and we wouldn't have known about it. So I think they do have a role to play, but do they need to be reformed? Yes. And also, do they need to be reduced? Yes. We've actually got too many. I mean, I can't remember how many subsects of the UN there are, but there are an awful lot. And sometimes I wouldn't say competing against each other, but sometimes you get conflicting messages from something like the UNHCR compared to the UN Security Council resolution. So it definitely does need reform, and in my view, slimmed down. But one of the reasons why they won't reform, and one of the reasons why they won't slim down, it generates a lot of money and also provides a lot of employment for people who wouldn't have employment. And when you have those people in power, they're unlikely to cut off their paycheck. So the status quo is what we have and what they'll continue to do.
Yeah, speaking about employment, I have a feeling that those who used to work in OSCE Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine, very few, according to my knowledge, maybe it's I don't have real data, but very few international seconded mission members found the job within OSCE. You know, maybe some consultancies like I did, or with OSCE, Office of Democratic Institutions, but not so many former SMM members got some, let's say, professional positions or seconded positions.
I think that's very true. Although I do know some that have gone to, well, outside the OSCE into the sort of war crimes investigations, where their experience of knowing the ground and knowing the people obviously helps. But I think one of your earlier speakers mentioned that one of the great sort of problems with when you have a consensus organization like the OSCE, you can often have aggressors, which we now have in the OSCE, but also the United Nations, when you've got China, Russia, and America, the United Kingdom, and France. It's quite difficult to really get a consensus on big geopolitical issues, especially when one country, or a P5 member, has launched an invasion against another country. You're never going to get a consensus in those areas. And when you do, and if you look way back into 2003 and the Iraq War, where there was some form of consensus, the UN Security Council resolution was so vague that it's open to misinterpretation on both sides. So I'm afraid it's a rather simplistic view, is that I don't give a lot of credibility to the United Nations, other than as an opportunity to highlight an issue and have the beginnings of a conversation about it. And I suspect that feeling is slightly shared by America and Russia. They don't see that these forums as being absolutely crucial to their national interests, because their national interest is effectively elsewhere.
Yeah, maybe it would help just to have clear definition what national interests of those privileged 5 permanent council member states is actually. That would help.
Well,
because technically speaking, they can veto any word said at the UN Security Council. And they can declare it as a national interest.
And, effectively, we know that the P5 was set up, from the victors of World War II. And, how relevant is that today? I actually do think it is relevant. But, you'll probably say to me, well, why isn't India on there? Or, why isn't, an African country in there? And in some cases, the answer is that they don't have the military capability, or they're not a nuclear power. And all those 5 countries are a nuclear power. I know China is, but if you want to bring in an African country or a South American country, that's not a nuclear power.
India and Pakistan, they are both nuclear powers.
Yes, but there's not much in Africa. I think South Africa was a nuclear power 30 years ago, but it's not. So
they gave up nuclear program. Yeah.
So I suppose the real question now is the P5 as it's currently constituted in the UN Security Council, is that still relevant to today's world? I actually think it is because I'm British and I'm a member. My country is a member of the P5, but it
Yeah.
does come with a lot of responsibility. And actually, the irony, apart from America, Russia, and China, there are some other countries that also, when you come to sort of troop contributing nations to a potential peacekeeping force, that are in a much better place to provide. I mean, if you look, if there ever was, let's say, a peacekeeping force in the Donbass or Crimea, in the future, you're not going to have any Western countries participating in that. It's going to be very much coming from maybe China or South Africa because they have the capability to do it. So, whilst I'm comfortable with the UK being a member of the P5, is that I can see why some other countries may say, well, is that setup still relevant in 2023?
Yeah. So what's your general opinion about future of this world? Where are we
Well,
heading?
and then I'm very pessimistic on a number of levels. First of all, you know, COVID, yeah, because that has changed the world very quickly, in my view, for the worst. I don't see any benefits from, um, the progress of technology at the expense of what I call customer service. I don't see any tangible benefits in that. And I think the lack of personal contact actually creates potential more grievances. And so, I don't like the progress that is not progress or the direction that AI and technology is taking the world. Yeah, because I think that it takes us away from those personal relationships, which are so important. So, but I accept that that is a reality, but that has been given an extra boost as a result of COVID. Secondly, is that we're still in an economic crisis across the world. And I don't think people really realize how bad this is. I'm very lucky. I live in where the state, provides a lot for us, but it comes at an enormous cost in tax and everything. Uh, um, and I worry about many other countries that don't have that support from the state to look after them to the level that we do. Thirdly, I worry about the cost of living down to an individual, and oil prices are back up to their original heights. Any form of conflict always pushes the oil and gas prices higher. So I don't see much sort of economic sort of economic sort of growth over the next few years, which worries me. And then you've got the wars that we've been talking about, which do still have the possibility to escalate. I mean, I don't think they will, but the Middle East is always a volatile area, and it's quite possible that Russia and Ukraine could escalate again, and that will all be negative for us as individuals, but us in the world as individual countries. And you never know whether China might perhaps see a window of opportunity to do something in Taiwan, which might create even more problems. I don't think they will, and please don't add too much weight to that. But there are some people that might see a window of opportunity to create more problems. So I am rather pessimistic over the next sort of 3 to 5 years. But I'm also really worried about the younger group of people that are coming through, where we used to travel and be educated. And since 1990, if you're a young person, you had the opportunity to travel all over the world by and large. Now those limitations are in place, either because of visa restrictions or because of cost, and that creates their own sort of potential. I wouldn't say a conflict dynamic, but it narrows people's views, of the world. I mean, you and I are very lucky that we've seen many different countries and many different societies, rich, poor, you name it. I think we're better people having seen that, and we're slightly more informed, and we're possibly even more opinionated. But I don't see that opportunities that I had as a young man being so available to the youth of today. And that is not only driven by conflict, but it's driven by the move to do, it's much easier to remote work. And the ability to get on a plane and travel for work is, I think, is going to come less and less.
So do you
That's
think,
before we even mention climate change.
yeah, okay, do you think this economy crisis and limitations, which actually became very visible during COVID time, I think everything started with COVID, all this economy crisis at global scale, because United States, European Union, they were printing a lot of money without any backup.
Yeah.
So that caused inflation. Also, we have energy crisis. Even when you mentioned China and Chinese economy, they're also in the decline because whole world is interlinked. If buying power, for instance, in UK or United States is going down for average persons, of course, that reflects on production in China or Indonesia or Vietnam, wherever, you know. So, but do you think those restrictions would radicalize a lot of younger generations?
I don't think radicalize. No, I think that's too strong a word. But I think what it will do, it could potentially deny them the opportunity to have wider opinions and wider knowledge. I don't think it will, radicalize them in terms of, as we've seen, some,
Let's say
Islamic
xenophobia
radicalization.
or something, because if you are not traveling, you have prejudice. I mean, you can expect to have some prejudice about certain people that you have never seen, and you
Well,
get
yeah, I
opinions
think that's
through
a
social
valid
media.
point. But I think the one advantage that social media might be able to play is that a lot of young people do have access to that and realize that there is another life beyond there.
Yeah.
But that's possibly the only means. But all we all know social media can be used for completely the wrong meaning, and actually social media itself can become a means to radicalize somebody. So um, I wouldn't put too much emphasis on that. Um, I really like to think that people don't want to be in a conflict. And one of the ways to avoid a conflict is to have a conversation on a one-to-one level with people,
Yeah.
face to face. And what I worry about is that we are moving away from that. Whether it be customer service, whether it be diplomacy, whether it be politics, it's all being taking space either on social media or in the written form and not in a conversation. And even if you live in a country with your neighbors, everyone knows you should try and get on with your neighbors. And I just sort of feel we're losing that human action. And the real question, I suppose, is it any different now from 50 years ago? And I rather wish my sort of parents were still alive, because this is the question I'll be asking them. If you look back to 1973, we had an oil crisis, we had the Yom Kippur War, we had the Cold War at its height, we had the Vietnam War. Were people thinking like I am thinking now, or was it just a sort of passing sense because they had seen and experienced war themselves 30 years previously in the World War? I mean, you're younger than me, but what do you think? Do you think we're experiencing something akin to 1973?
Well, I'm sure that a lot of people thought the end of the world is coming soon. Probably. That deserves actually more profound research. Maybe some scholars will come up with answers to your question, with some real data, because it's a very interesting standpoint of view, what people were thinking at that time, because almost whole world was burning, and there was also economy crisis, and many things were happening, just like these days. So I think we had a very, very interesting conversation, and I hope we will both be in good health in peaceful world, and meet sometimes again to talk about, let's say, more pleasant topics than we have talked today. Thank you very much for your participation in my podcast, and thank you very much for your support to the podcast. So, do you have any other questions for me, or we can say goodbye until next episode?
Well, let's say goodbye, but I will continue to follow you, and as I say, I had a really good experience with you in Ukraine, and thank you for that. And I'm sorry that we both left Ukraine and the war then happened, because I'm sure we've all got good memories and friends and colleagues who have been really affected by it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed, and let's see each other. Hopefully, when you come to Bosnia, to Sarajevo,
I will do.
just
I will
give
do.
me,
I have
give
been to
me a phone
Sarajevo once, a
call,
long time
and
ago. But take care, Dan. Really good to see you.
okay, see you.